All right, Nightmare Success listeners, we're back. I'm back. I took a week off and just got back from family vacation, which was great. Held my family hostage for a week. Awesome. I have. We all come here for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, set yourself free? Well, I have a great guest and Branden Coluccio, who I've been doing a little bit of research. It's funny how we all got connected because Justin Paffney, who is somebody that I follow, and he does white collar advice, helps people through the process of getting out of their nightmare and smoothing the ride. Um, anyway, I emailed him, told him he'd make a great guest, and so he put us Branden and Justin and me in a group email and said Branden would be a great guest also. And so Branden reached out through the email and said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." So we have connected, and I want to congratulate Branden. He just became a dad for a baby girl on, was it Thursday, Branden?
Thursday, yeah, June 8th. Thank you.
Awesome. So he joined the girl dad fathers. I've got three, and I just told him it's awesome. You'll love it. A little bit about Branden. I mean, the cool thing about Branden's story is he was doing a lot of cool stuff before his nightmare happened. How he handled his crisis, I think everybody who's listening can take away tips and nuggets of information of how to get through a crisis and how to handle it. Branden he had early success. He had a healthcare company that he sold for multi-millions before the age of 30. He's 29 years old. That ended up getting a twisted nightmare that came back on him. And he's written a book. It's called Looking Forward. And he did that while he was going through the process when even he was getting ready for his pre-sentencing report. But his attitude is what really I thought, captured me. I just thought it was just a great way that he handles himself now, how he handled himself through the crisis and what he was doing before. So Branden, I need to welcome our sponsor in too. So before we get into all that with Branden, Auto Plaza Direct, our sponsor, who likes spending a couple weekends walking lots, looking for a car? Then you spend 4 to 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like going to a trip with a dentist. Well, there's a better way. Take away all the pain and hassle of getting your car, called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They'll deliver that car to you in any state. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them that Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Now we start with Branden. Branden, how you doing, man?
I'm awesome, Brent. Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it. And thank you for the nice, kind words and the warm intro.
Well, I appreciate you being on. And, you have a fascinating story because, and I want you to take us back a little bit, Branden,
Sure.
because you're kind of in two parts, but as you were growing up, can you kind of lead us back into what Branden, what that life was like, family life, siblings, all that?
Yeah, I had a really wonderful childhood. I have two amazing parents. I have great mentors and role models in my family. So pretty much all of my family members are small business owners and entrepreneurs. So my grandparents owned restaurants. I grew up in the back of restaurants, sweeping floors and washing dishes as a kid. My dad's a high-end home builder, and basically all he would ever let me do is sweep floors. But anyway, so I was always working these like odd jobs as a very young kid for my different family members' businesses. And I was always fascinated by the dialogue at our holiday dinners, and just we were very family oriented family. And so we would spend a lot of time together, and they're always talking about their businesses. And instead of kind of sitting with the kids, right, I always wanted to be with the adults having these, big boy conversations about their companies and hearing about all the problems and then the interesting things that were going on. And I just grew up fascinated by it and was lucky enough that they would expose me to it at a very early age. And so, got that entrepreneurial bug pretty quick.
I
And
think it's
the thing that
interesting
was,
too, Brandon, how when kids grow up with entrepreneurial parents
yeah,
or in that family, it's funny how that borns out entrepreneurial kids because they see it, they understand the risk part of it, they understand the rewards of it. It's you see it over and over again.
yeah, I couldn't imagine life any other way. And I won't get ahead, but it was kind of interesting how I developed as a young man as well throughout, my later teenage years and my early 20s, which I'll probably get to. But just yeah, really, really great time growing up. The only adversity that I really ever faced in my life was my sister was somebody who struggled deeply with mental health and substance abuse, and so that started when it started a little later in my life. I was probably about 17 or 18 years old when she was starting to go through it. So I was pretty much right off going to college at that point, but I started to see the change occur, started to see the stress and the change in my parents. And, substance abuse is something that touches all of us. And I grew up in an area, I think we can all probably say this now, but I grew up in an area where it was really prevalent in high school. I had kind of friends and classmates who were overdosing and dying and suicides and all this other stuff, and it was really, really difficult. And I was always wondering, like, why isn't anybody doing anything about this? This seems to be getting worse. I knew nothing about the landscape of treatment centers and what options were really available, but I just remember seeing my parents like struggle through trying to find the right help, and how incredibly expensive it was and all this other stuff. Anyway, so yeah, so growing up was just wonderful. And I knew from a young age, like I said, in those conversations with my family members, I always would be asking them, kind of funny questions like, well, why don't you guys go acquire another business, or why don't you franchise your restaurants, or, why aren't you doing these,
Get it
150,
bigger.
200 unit, track home developments. And they would look at me and be like, Branden, you're like 13 years old. Like, what are you talking about? Right. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I would read, I was a big reader, I still am. And I just would read about what all these other, entrepreneurs and developers and folks were doing. And so I would go back to them and ask them those questions. And so, I decided that them shutting me down, I was like, well, fine, I'm going to go build big businesses then. That's what I want to do. And the way that I thought you did that was to go through we'll call it the Wall Street route, which
Yeah.
is, kind of the investment banking, private equity world. I think there is some truth to that. But
Yeah.
anyway, for me, I think, I'm kind of a cross between, at this point in my life, I'm a cross between a corporate finance, like private equity trained type, as well as an entrepreneur. And so I think there's an advantage to that combined skill set that I developed over the years. And so, once I went off to school, that was the route that I wanted to go. And I eventually battled my way into, like, I'll call it management consulting, M&A advisory work for a small boutique group outside of Philadelphia, focusing on biotech and pharmaceuticals. And then I eventually battled my way into private equity. So I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't graduate with a 4.0, right? It was very difficult for me to break into this world of private equity. So I ended up working for they're a very well-established firm, but they're not well known. They do a lot of real estate, like tons of it. And then the other side of the business, they do private business acquisitions. And so I worked on that side of the company, straight underneath the managing director. And so as a 24-year-old kid, you're getting exposure to, companies that are, making $25 million of EBITDA, and you're behind the scenes, going to board meetings and, talking to CEOs, and I'm cold calling CEOs to try to buy their companies. I mean, it's a really wild experience as a young man to be in those conversations when you have no business even being in the room, right? Like, I'm a knucklehead. Like, why did you let me in here? And but anyway, there's no better place, in my opinion, for like a young person to develop their skill set, both the ability to articulate difficult concepts in a high pressure situation. I've been kicked out of board meetings before. That's maybe another story. And then also the ability to really have to build this certain level of like mental agility, because in private equity, you're like, okay, we've got a portfolio with like 8 businesses in it. And you've got to be able to jump from this company to that company to that company, which could be in completely different industries and sectors with different problems. And you
Yeah.
have to be able to switch that like very quickly. And then on the acquisitions side, the ability to get up to speed on a business very, very fast and how it all works. Like you have, 24 to 48 hours to kind of figure it out. And so it's just such a great training around, in my opinion, for entrepreneurs. And so, yeah, so I then eventually was, our firm was approached by a couple of executives from the healthcare space, substance abuse, and they wanted to go off. They turned around a treatment facility, or I guess it was a chain of treatment facilities. It was struggling, and they kind of revamped it, revived it, brought in new staffing, improved patient acquisition and all this other stuff. And they went to the owners of that group and said, hey, we've like fixed your business here. Can we have some equity, please? And they said no. So these gentlemen were off raising capital, trying to do their own thing. And that's how we got put together. And the deal didn't work out with the firm, but they called me and said, hey, Branden, you're young, sharp guy, would you potentially have interest in helping us raise the rest of this capital? And if you're successful in doing so, we would be willing to give you, bring you in as a partner, an equal partner, so you'd have a third of the company.
And that's a big deal, Branden. How old were you at that point?
I was 26 years old.
Yeah, 26. I mean, and it's funny too, because I was in your shoes at that point, and at 25, 26, you think that, I think there's something that happens like when you get into that rhythm and flow and you start seeing the behind the scenes stuff, and then you start seeing things that can grow, you think you can do anything. And, at that age, I'm sure you thought you had seen enough at, 25, 26 years old. Hell yes, I need to be in here. I've earned my way to this spot. I can do this and I can do that. And I'm really good at sales. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a fact. There's actually something interesting. I remember saying to my wife, when I got into private equity, I was like, I thought that I would be more impressed. Like I thought it was going to be, I mean, it's definitely high level. I'm not saying it's not, but I was ready for, conversations. I couldn't understand anything people were talking about, and I was keeping up pretty well. And after a few years, I was like, man, I could do like what these guys do. Yeah. I could totally do this. And so, when that opportunity presented itself to me, I was like, wow, this is my moment to sort of, kind of quench that thirst for entrepreneurship, and then also apply my, I'll call it my corporate development skills, on the private equity and fundraising side. And so, this is like my moment. I felt like it was a moment for me, and it was a moment to do some good, right? I've explained, kind of the challenges that I've faced, both with substance abuse and mental health in my family, and a lot of people that I know. So I was like, wow, this is going to be an opportunity to do some good out there, and to, kind of step into this entrepreneurial, version of myself. And so we were quite successful. We went out and we raised all the money we needed, and we were off and running, and they had a whole team ready to go. And we basically just poached all the A players, and, we were off to the races. And so, built the business up over a period of about, I'll call it like 18 months. And at the end of 18 months, we had an offer from a private equity firm for $45 million. In a very short period of time. And it was like, wow, this thing's we didn't even think about selling this thing. Right. But we hit it just at the point where private equity became very acquisitive. And that industry is now a darling of private equity, but this was a little earlier on in that cycle. And so, there were a lot of guys out there just, snapping up firms, and we were so young that I didn't think anybody would find it attractive. But they did. We had a few offers and ended up taking another one, not that one. It was an offer for about just under $67 million. And so that deal closed in December of 2017, December 11th. Yeah, I was 29.
29 years old. So what's going through your mind now, Branden? You've conquered something that most people don't conquer when they're 60 years old or ever.
Yeah.
What are you thinking in your mind at this point?
Well, I'm thinking, man, now I can finally get started. Serious. I remember calling my
Yeah, I
dad.
got some walking around money to really build something.
That's exactly right. I was like, wait till you see what I build. And I remember calling my dad, and he's like, look, just go slow, like slow and steady. Like you don't have to prove anything to anyone, right? Like we all know you're capable. And so I go off and I co-founded a real estate development company called Captiva Capital Partners. We were doing, Class A self-storage projects
Yeah,
in
that sounds
Philadelphia
good.
and Florida. We did really well. We developed probably if you add them all up, probably about $40 million in projects in our first year. We did Philadelphia's largest Class A self-storage facility that was sold to CubeSmart. Did a couple deals down in Florida. Those were sold off as well. I also was I bought another business. And then I was in the process of buying another company, a labeling company. They label like food packaged products and things like that,
Okay.
pharmaceuticals. And so I was on the eve of closing that deal, and I just got all the financing in place, like we were ready to go, and I could have probably flipped this business for five. I had it under agreement for 3. I probably could have flipped it for 5 or 6 pretty quickly if I wanted to. And right about on the eve of closing, I find out that I'm going to be indicted. I get this phone call from my lawyer. I'm in my real estate development office, and I get a call, and he says, Branden, I have some terrible, horrible news. The government has decided, that they're going to take a firm position here. They want to make an example out of your case and pretty much everybody involved. And, you were the CFO. You also are educated, articulate, intelligent individual, and they know that, and you're quite the trophy. And so that was it, in a phone call.
How long did you have Branden in that process of knowing that they started to look? Because as we all know, when it starts out, it doesn't seem like much to it, and then and then sometimes I've talked to so many guys where they say, well, almost seems like they forgot about it, and then they get the phone call. What was your process like?
I've heard like horror stories, like it takes like 5 years for them to do anything. Ours moved relatively quickly. So we'd heard some rumblings of, we'll call it like an investigation prior to even the transaction, and the buyers were aware of this. Okay. So nothing was ever hidden from the buyers. There were no issues with the transaction whatsoever. The issues were, operational in nature. And so we had heard some things about it. We had some lawyers do some digging, and nobody could really find anything out. Like, hey, this is probably nothing. They haven't moved. No subpoenas were issued at that point. So that was pretty much it. We kind of said, okay, well, we've done what we had to do. We disclosed everything to everybody. And as far as we could tell, we had the most expensive healthcare lawyers in Philadelphia you could find. They're like, yeah, I mean, everything's fine. So great. Anyway, so we just move on. And then after the transaction closed, probably 6 months or so, we got our first subpoenas. And what they started to do was they were interviewing employees first, and they went in and subpoenaed probably 20 employees. And nobody really mentioned me. I wasn't brought up until the end, when they interviewed she was the director of our billing department, somebody that reported to me. And when they asked her who she reports to, she said my name. And apparently their response was, well, who's that? Yeah. And so that was how my name got thrown into the ring. And, she obviously she was under oath. She had to explain who I was and what I did and all that stuff. And so, sure. So that was it. And then I would say this is probably 2018 now. So I would say about a year later is when, and I was also then subpoenaed shortly thereafter, maybe a couple months. And then, within a year, that was when the indictment came down.
What was your thought when you got that call from the attorney?
My life is over. Everything I've built, I had a wonderful reputation. I literally and I'm not saying this to try to relive the past, but it's just true. They would call me Boy Wonder around the office, like in private equity, and I would literally have these private equity guys sitting me down, introducing me to people like as Branden, like, hey, you got to know this kid. He's a future billionaire. Like, you just really got to get to know him. And I like that.
It probably filled you up for sure.
That mattered to me. That's what I was getting at, is that built my ego up into something that was so fragile, because I identified myself as all of those things, smart, intelligent, capable, successful, wealthy, all this stuff that I thought was important, and is to an extent, but I had overvalued that, and I had placed all of my worth in those things. And so when all of that crumbled, you asked me, how did I feel? I felt like I was nothing. I felt like I suddenly
lost your identity.
And it happened like that, right? And I don't know how it was for you, but it was just all of a sudden it was gone. And in that moment, I went into my partner's offices, and I resigned from I relinquished all my equity. I just said, look, just, write me a check for what I have into it, and you guys keep the upside. We had big institutional capital. I didn't want anything to come back to them. All my other businesses, I resigned from. Deals that were in process got shut down. So immediately I went from a guy going, 100 miles an hour, like really like enterprise kingdom building, if you will, like building real enterprise value, to a guy sitting on his couch feeling sorry for himself, like that, like a light switch.
Is your, at that point, relationship wise, you weren't married then, right? At that point, but
I had just gotten married to my wife, and she knew. And as soon as we got subpoenaed, I told her something funny was up.
Yeah.
And all of the lawyers that I talked to said, Branden, like, you're probably fine. Like, we can't really see anything necessarily that ties you all that well to this situation from what we know they're looking at. But again, like you said, some of the other folks have mentioned, like, you don't really know a whole lot. They don't tell you much. And so eventually we found out that, that advice was not correct. But my wife knew. She knew that this was possible. I told her straight up. I said, look, I was the CFO of this company. If you look at any active investigations that have a result, the CFO is always part of it somehow. And so, we could be facing a difficult challenge here. And she said, I don't care. I'll go through whatever we have to with you. So,
well, and I think you bring up a good point there too, because in the world of taking titles, that a lot of people don't understand that when you take on those titles, when a federal investigation comes the way that it does, like a tidal wave, whether you know or don't know, you're in a responsible position to know.
Correct.
So your intent doesn't necessarily mean that I, willfully, intentionally did this. You were in the position that you were supposed to know. And so it's, that can be a really confusing time period, because, I look back at our situation, and absolutely, there was a lot of things that I should have known, because I enjoyed the position I was in. I liked the big title, but there was a lot of laziness in my part of not doing what I needed to do wholly in my position. So that's one of those things that you really don't really, I don't know, you learn that on the job once you get indicted, that, it's getting that really fancy title also comes with a lot of liability if things come the other way.
That's a fact. And I did not even realize that a little bit. And I had, I think more training than most do, coming from the private equity world about, kind of, we'll call it corporate responsibility, but I didn't fully appreciate it. And I also was somebody who struggled deeply with imposter syndrome. I think some of that was due to my age. But also I think I just, part of me, and this is getting maybe a little too deep into the psychology of it, but, just growing up in the shadow of a highly successful father, right?
Yeah.
You're constantly wanting to impress that person, and feeling inferior. And so when I was in the situation that I found myself in, that I had put myself there, right? I did it intentionally, partnering with these guys. I caved, I think, in certain situations where I could have questioned more, I could have pushed harder,
Sure.
I could have held a firmer line. And instead, I just said, okay, yeah, I trust you. I believe you. Like,
Yeah.
I got you. I'll back you up on whatever. And like, I did that. I said those things. And so, at the end of the day, I was forced to take accountability for it. And I did, and I do. And I'm much wiser as the result of all of that.
Well, but I think here's what I think is really interesting about, there's a lot of things interesting about your story, Branden, but I thought when you found out
Yeah.
and how you found out, a lot of times people go into like a fetal position and it all just kind of swims over the top of them. I thought what you did was interesting from how you handled your crisis, because one of the things with Justin wanting you to be incorporated into our email is that how you handled that was a lot of what he talks about too. But you went active and started taking action against what can I do for mitigation for myself.
Yeah.
In a situation where I know that there's going to be an outcome where I'm indicted, I'm probably going to do a plea, and how do I best make that happen? Can you walk us through how your whole thought process was on that? I think it's just helpful for anybody that's going through a crisis.
100%. I think it applies to any sort of moment of adversity that people face in life, not just this situation. But I wasn't strong immediately. I had, like I said, I ended up as a guy sitting on my couch for about 3 weeks, and I just was sulking. The poor me role. Why is this happening? I don't deserve this. It's not fair. All this self-talk that we have, very, very selfish, kind of thought process. And I remember just sitting there going, I'm 31 years old. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Like, I have theoretically like a long road ahead. And I was consuming a lot of alcohol. I was self-medicating badly. I was, out of shape. I just, my whole world had kind of fallen apart, and I'd allowed myself to go with it. And eventually I got to the point where, I was sitting there one day and I said, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I have to make a choice. And in that moment, I just decided that I needed a big objective. I needed a big target and a big promise to hit. And so I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out. And I'm going to take this moment, right? This awful event in my life, and I'm going to find a way to take the energy from this thing and apply that energy towards something good. And I'm going to do it in a way that lifts up the spirits of people that I interact with.
I love that.
And this was like my big scary why, right? And I made that promise. But I verbalized it. I said to my wife, like, this, I'm doing this for us, for you, and for myself. And that if at any point I falter here, I need you to really hold me accountable. And that was it. I'd reached out and I've gotten support. I found mentorship from individuals who battled through the situation that I was going through. I've always found success in finding people who have done the thing you want to do or something very similar and done it successfully, and go learn as much as you can from them. So I did that. And I started to give back. I did a speaking engagement at a university. I wrote a book. I wrote a little self-directed course along with that book, and then licensed it to a company called Prison Professors. And then they provide educational materials to prisons and jails around the country. And so my material, it was interesting timing, because as you said earlier in the interview, I was still going through the process. But so I was still learning how I was dealing with struggle, but all I did was document how I was doing it in my thought process. And so anyway, my material was already being disseminated, before I ever went away, and was already like benefiting people. So I had gotten some quick wins within probably 6 months. I'd really taken some positive steps. I also immediately really poured myself into physical exercise. I got a therapist. I I tried to slow my drinking down, which I did semi-successfully. But yeah, it was really like a reinvention of myself, if you look
Well,
at it.
I think it's, we got two entrepreneurs here talking to each other, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds. But I
Yeah,
think one of the things that, I love to hear, and because it always is right. At your lowest point, you chose survivor instead of victim. And at that point, you set a goal. So putting yourself on the map again,
yeah,
that goal gave you a destination. And then you sought out mentors that were people that really give you the answers to the test before the test. And that's something that an entrepreneur learns early on. Who's
yeah,
doing this? Who's getting this? And let me talk to them so that I don't have to reinvent my wheel here. I'm just going to do what they do because that'll give me confidence that it works. So you did those things at your lowest point.
yeah.
And as far as your connection that you made with Justin and then with Mike Santos, was that just searching the internet? Like, were you just checking out what's out there?
Yeah.
Who could help me?
I told my wife, actually. I said, "Hey, I found this guy on the internet, and he's
And
a
he's got a lot
famous
of
lab.
followers, by the way. That's how he's got a ton. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers,
He's
I think,
the
on
those guys
TikTok.
are they're the best in the country. I mean, like hands down, no question. They're rock stars, and they're wonderful people to work with. And I told my wife, I said, I found this guy on the internet who I think might be helpful. And she's like, what are you talking about? Right. And you don't need that. You're going to be fine.
Yeah,
Like we're still sort of telling
you'll
ourselves
need
that
some
story.
internet guy.
Yeah. And so I waited. And my biggest regret to this day was actually like that I waited that long. I wish I had
Yeah,
brought him in sooner, because just the support, as I said, and the mentorship, what that does for your personal development and your mental health, to have somebody who is speaking from a position of experience
yeah,
to guide you through. And I talk about this in my own content now, and my clients, like the value of mentorship is so important.
huge.
And so for me, I just wish that I brought them in sooner. But yeah, I found them on the internet, and they're wonderful, and they're both good friends to this day.
So, Branden, you're going through this process. Your wife is going through this with you, which I also think is a huge deal because it gives you somebody to bounce things as you're going through, and an ear. Um, when did you start hearing from your attorney what they were going to do and prison time and all that? As you like, what did it just continue to work its way? Because I think I remember you saying they were talking about a lot of time to begin with. And
Yeah,
it
they
started working itself down. I don't know if that was before your PSR, after, but you
so
continued to get yourself into a better position.
it was a weird situation because it started out as a state case, and then the federal government had originally passed on it, and then they decided, well, if you're going to pursue it, we don't
Yeah.
want to, get outshined here. So that's pretty much what happened. And so I was charged at the state level initially when I got that phone call. I was charged at the state level, and so we were like, we got a good judge, and we were like, you know what, like we might want to take a shot here at the state level. And then basically what happened was the federal government said, I hadn't been charged at the federal level. The state charges were, the list was quite long, but anyway, it always starts out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were on the eve of trial, like ready to go. And my lawyer's like, Branden, you might want to consider a plea deal. $500,000 in legal fees later. I wish you had told me that earlier, but anyway, the whole time, this is what they do. He's telling you, we got a great chance, good case, wonderful character, great background. It's going to be a good story to tell. And I'm like, okay, I trust you.
Yeah.
And then on the eve of trial, he says, you might want to consider a plea deal. You're a young guy. And oh, by the way, we don't know what the federal government is going to charge you with, but if they match the state charges, they're going to add up real quick. You could end up, in the 10 to 15 year range. And I'm like, wait, what did you just say?
Yeah, it's a
Right.
decade. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't want to see you do that. And I was like, no, oh, thank you. Of course not. Right. Like, And so I had to have that conversation with my wife and say, look, like this is where this could go if they
Mm,
decide to penalize us. And basically, the position the federal government had taken when we told them we were willing to actually go to trial, they said, "That's great. Like, go ahead. We're going to be in the audience watching your state case, and regardless of if you win or lose, we're going to be standing outside the courtroom ready to charge you when you're done."
mm,
And I was like, "Oh boy, right." So we could end up fighting the same case twice, and they have all your ammunition.
right.
So we were checkmated at that point. And so we went to them and said, fine, we'll consider a deal. And, that was when they came back. Wasn't much of a negotiation. They said 37 months, $3.1 million fine. We went back and said, look, I'll take a misdemeanor and I'll be willing to do jail time in exchange for a misdemeanor. They said, absolutely not. We tried everything and they just they dug their heels in, and that was it. And I
Well,
sat down with my wife.
what was the
Go ahead.
charge they came against you with, Brandon?
One count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, and it
Yeah.
was like, I can't remember what section it is anymore, but it's like the lowest one. It carries a 5-year cap.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's still
It's
felony.
still
It's
all
still
there.
got teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So you settle on that. You go and you go to your sentencing hearing. Do you pretty much know that that's the deal on both sides?
It was a C
37
plea.
months.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for anybody listening, a C plea is when you're basically both sides have negotiated a deal already. Typically, it's a range, but this was like an actual number. All the numbers were negotiated, and the agreement was they will not negotiate for more, which typically the prosecution argues for the highest possible sentence, and then the defense argues for the lowest. The judge usually ends up somewhere in the middle. Um, in this case, basically both sides went in. We're not going to negotiate at all. We're both in agreement that this is it. The judge would either agree or disagree with the deal and stamp it. And in that case, she did. So.
Mm-hmm. And at this time, I can't remember. I think we talked about this before you got on, but your pre-sentencing report was a big, I think, key in your the process, because I think the way that you went about that and the connection that you made with your pre-sentencing report officer probably, because that's something, I don't know if the judges read the letters. I hope they do, but I know that they probably take a look at that pre-sentencing report. And a lot of, you and I were talking about this, Brandon, is a lot of attorneys, even if they're really, really good attorneys, some of the best defense attorneys, they don't know anything about what happens with this pre-sentencing report and how that becomes your Bible, and then what happens after that, and then how that affects your case manager, how you get jobs in prison, how do you get out earlier, all those things really stem from that pre-sentencing report. So what you were talking about earlier, and I can't remember if we were talking before this or we were talking in the interview, but getting your narrative in there about who you are, and you're not this one thing, you are so many things leading up to this, is so key to letting you be a human being and not what just the the federal government's trying to sting you with.
It was huge. It was absolutely massive. And my lawyer basically said prior to that meeting, maybe a couple weeks ahead of time, knowing that it was coming up and being about to be scheduled, he said, yeah, it's no big deal. It should take, 10, 15 minutes. Just be yourself. He's going to ask you a couple questions, and then that's that. It's nothing really to worry about. Okay. And then, fortunately, I had good advisors, and they were like, that's not true.
That's not true.
This is the most important thing probably that you're going to do prior to your sentencing. And so I was very prepared. I had already had a draft manuscript of my book and the work that I was doing, the coursework that I was developing at the time. It wasn't completed, but I brought a manuscript of everything with me to my PSR or to my pre-sentencing interview, excuse me. And he absolutely, the officer, my pretrial officer, like loved it. He was, very, he was willing to give me time to explain my story and to talk to him about, my objective from the start was always to help people. And I'm not going to let this situation deter that objective. I'm just now going to be forced to help people in a different way than I had originally expected to do so, and from a different context. And so, he really, I think that message resonated with him. And I also shared, all my upbringing and background and story and my marriage and everything. And we had a really long conversation. It ended up being like 2 hours long, right? Versus
not 10 or 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes, right? So it was a really, really long conversation. The PSR came back great, made recommendations for, for RDAP and other programs, and really like wished me well along the way, and actually stayed in touch with me throughout the process. And, had said to me, he said, Branden, there's like very few people, come through this situation and are willing to take the same approach that you have. And you clearly have a gift for, trying to help others, and you have great education and experience and all this other stuff. He's like, share that gift when you're there, right? There's a lot of people that would benefit from that. And so I stuck to that, and I did all of those things. I volunteered in the GED department. I taught guys how to read. It's an interesting thing, teaching grown men how to read. And I taught entrepreneurship classes. I taught financial literacy courses, all that
Branden,
stuff.
let's talk about that, because I mean, there's nothing like a voluntary surrender at the gates of wherever you're going. And if I remember right, you went to a low instead of a camp, and there's a big difference. I was at Leavenworth, so we did have the fence and the razor wire and all that, because it was supposed to be a low and didn't get accredited, so they just kept it, looking that way. But you actually went to a low, and there's a lot less freedom. Like, I would get out and walk to the food warehouse 1.5 miles every day beyond the fenced area. And in a low, you have scheduled moves on the hour, every hour. And it's a different environment. The day of, can you kind of walk me through the day of being there?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my first day, I surrender. My wife walks in with me. I walk up to the front gates, and I'm working on a new book, and I write this whole experience in great detail. And when you pull up to a prison that you're about to walk into, the only thing that I can attribute it to, particularly if you're someone like me, I've never been in any trouble. I've never been to jail, never been in the back of a police car, never been in handcuffs. Like, this is a terrifying moment. It's sort of like facing your executioner, is the way that I've explained it to people. I think your body's like kind of triggering the exact same, fight or flight response. And so you walk up, and it's the full on deal. There's, turrets and, double razor wire fencing, razor wire on the ground, razor wire up high. There's a women's prison right across the street. So there were like women like yelling at me while I was like going into the facility. And I kissed my wife for the last time, and they start like cheering and yelling and stuff. It was quite the experience. So I walk in, and they were actually quite respectful. Go through processing. Everybody warned me of the squat and cough, right? Yeah. So I go in, and they strip everything down. You're there just kind of butt naked, and the guy's over in the other room picking out your shoes and your clothes which don't fit. And he comes back, and I'm like, all right, this is it. I know what's coming next. And so I'm like, I kind of like start to like bend over, and I like end up in this like weird squat, like CrossFit position. And he sees what I'm doing, and he's like, no, don't do that. And I'm like, what? And so like I freeze. He didn't ask me to do anything. I'm just so nervous that like I just started to like, show my ass off. And he's like, no, stop. And he's like, and he goes, show me the bottom of your feet. And I was like, what? Aren't you supposed to be like looking in my ass right now? Isn't that? Right. I didn't want to remind him. But anyway, so I lifted up my feet, and I got through without the squat and cough. I'm like the first person I've ever met that's actually gotten through that situation. Wow. So anyway, that happens, and finally get dressed, and I've got pants that are like up to my knees. It's just a wild experience. And because I went in during COVID, they sent me straight to quarantine, which is
that's what I wanted you to talk about, because I can't imagine that type of entrance. And I think you're the first person I've talked to that went through at COVID, but They put you you say they put you in quarantine. That means that you were put in solitary confinement.
I was put in shoe.
Yeah, that's
straight out of the gate.
That is unbelievable. How long were you in there?
22 straight days.
That's a long time for somebody that just like hours ago kissed their wife at the gate and thought you were walking into whatever your life was going to be, and then you go into the hole.
Changed me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wild experience. I remember that. It's not the sound it makes, but the finality of the deadbolt when it locks behind you, and
the heavy deadbolt.
It's a heavy door and it's a heavy deadbolt, and it's like, man, there's like, how did my life end up like this, right? How did I end up here is like where you start to go.
Sure.
And you're like, I can't get out of this room. Like there's nothing. I can scream, I can yell, I can kick the doors, I can do whatever I want. There's nothing I can do to get out of here. And it's like, it's an intense...
I remember you said you had a little claustrophobia going in. So probably help.
Couldn't get into elevators. I couldn't, I didn't like tight spaces. I would get anxiety attacks on airplanes and all this other stuff. So like I went into that environment and I dug deep, right? And you get to a point, I think it's a Bob Marley quote, but like you get to you dig deep enough and all you can find left is strength or something along those lines. And I had to find it. I had to just find that strength. And what I did was I would think of guys like Michael and, some of the other folks that I knew that had gone through solitary, like extended periods of solitary. And I just kept telling myself, look, if they can get through it and they're alive and they're doing well today, I will get through this. And I would just repeat that over and over and over again in my head until I believed it. And I would do lots of physical activity. So the way I would sort of distract myself at first was I would read, and every chapter I would drop to the floor. I would get a workout in. I would walk back and forth as much as I could. Look out the window a little bit. I mean, but it was nasty. We're in July, so it's summer. No air conditioning. The window opens about that much. And they let you out maybe every 2 or 3 days for a shower. And it's like 20 minutes. And they didn't give me anything. I had no utensils. I was eating with my ID card. I had no towel. The towel they give you is like a washcloth. So I would have to, clean myself. No shower shoes.
No shower shoes.
No shower. And everybody loses their mind when I say that. I did what I could with what I had. But it was really hard. But at the end of it, I walked out of that and was like, well, I just did the hardest possible thing I could do. So
everything else is downhill from here.
Exactly. That's what everybody said. They're like, you've never been to prison and they just shoved you into solitary like that. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, you're going to be fine.
So how was life, Branden, once you did get out?
Out of prison,
out of solitary into the prison world?
It was interesting. So I was moved from, my journey was crazy. And I'll if we have the time, I'll share all of it. But so 22 days in solitary, then I moved to general population, which is like a dormitory. And that is a different way of living, right? Once you get used to solitary, it's not so bad. Cell life is actually better than dorm life, in my opinion, having done both. And so you get in the dorms and there's an etiquette to follow. I got the worst bunk. I got the bunk right by the bathroom. I got the bunk mate below who was challenging. And so I just tried to keep to myself, read my books, exercise like a maniac. And that earned me a lot of respect. I would go right up to the guys working out hard and I would be like, look, just let me jump in, just let me keep up. And I would beat a lot of them. And so, that really helped me earn some respect in the community. And I ended up, becoming buddies with a lot of those guys. And just because we were united by the common interest of exercise. And so that really got me through in a lot of different ways, both socially and just mentally for myself. Yeah. So I was there for maybe a couple of weeks. And then I was admitted to the RDAP unit. And so
that's where they have the real rules.
Yeah, where the real rules live. And so for COVID protocol, though, every time you switched, you went in the facility, the overall prison, or out of the facility, or if you switched units, you had to do quarantine.
Man.
I went right back into quarantine again.
God.
And I did another, I think I did, this one was shorter. It was like 20 days or 22, 21 days. It's a little bit shorter that time. But I had a bunk mate this time. I wasn't alone,
Okay.
which is actually worse. Because if you imagine, imagine locking yourself in
a closet.
bathroom
Yeah.
or a closet with another man
For a long
for
time.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, you got people going to the bathroom and like right next to each other. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So it was quite the experience. But then I get over to RDAP, and that was a different world. I assimilated pretty quickly. I decided that I was going to invest 100% in the program, and that I was going to become a leader of the community, and I did. And I did it not like through brute force or trying to be a tough guy. I wasn't trying to pretend to be something that I wasn't. I did it from the perspective of, I just want to bring value to this community, and I want to help these guys who want to do better to actually do better and to share what I had with them. And so I approached everybody with the same level of respect, and I think it earned me a lot of support in the community. And so I was, fortunate enough to be in a leadership position very early on. And like I said, I hosted regular workshops on financial literacy and investments and entrepreneurship and building a
Did the guys
positive
like
mindset.
that, Branden? Did the guys
Loved
like?
it.
Yeah,
They loved it. Oh yeah. I would get shout outs in the community all the time. Like, man, you put on this amazing workshop. I learned so much. Thank you for doing that. I would get that all the time. But for me, it was rewarding, because when I would talk to a lot of these guys, I became friendly with them and learned about their past and their struggles and the things that they faced in life. Like, I grew up I had an amazing upbringing. Some of these guys that I met had horrible,
really tough stories,
like really, really, really tragic stories. And so when I would sit down with them one-on-one, and we would have really good conversations, and you learn that all they want to do is just be able to support their family and try to be better men. But they don't know how. There's never been any sort of positive mentorship or leadership in their life. They were taught to deal drugs in a lot of cases at, like 10 years old. And so they're kind of screwed from the start. And what I tried to do was just share with them that, that life is not sustainable. And I learned how much money you can make dealing drugs. They would tell me, and I'm like, holy shit, man. Like, it's really incredible. And that's what's so tempting to them is, I can make $100,000 in a weekend or whatever it is. Why am I going to go work for $12 an hour? Why would I do that? And I'm like, look, man, you make a lot of money, but it doesn't count, because you're going to get caught and you're going to end up in prison. And every stretch is going to get longer and longer, and you're never going to be able to take care of your family. So honest work is good work. And so I would just try to share these lessons with them, but also show them that, entrepreneurship can be a very freeing thing financially, and can put you in a position to be able to support your family and become a millionaire. And I would break down the basically compound interest math. I would do it on the whiteboard for them. And I would show them, I'm like, every man in this room, if they dedicate themselves to honest, good work, and you start a small business, eventually build it up to the point where you're earning 6 figures a year, it's very doable. You can be a millionaire in your lifetime, and you can build and share generational wealth with the people that you love. And you can do it in a way that's sustainable and honest. And so I think a lot of guys resonated with that when I would share that message with them and like show them exactly that it was possible. And it was just super rewarding. And I still do that work today. I'm an entrepreneurship coach for a group called Inmates to Entrepreneurs. And so they teach, formerly incarcerated individuals how to build and start and grow companies, for less than $1,000. So it's a lot of, home maintenance, landscaping, cleaning businesses, stuff that's, pretty low capex to start. So, it's incredibly rewarding work. And then I monetize this essentially the same skill set through my coaching programs. And so it's through all of this negativity, I found a deeper part of myself that I didn't know existed. I didn't know that I was a teacher. I didn't know that I made a good coach. I didn't know that I could lead people in my darkest moment, lead people who are, tougher than me, who are from worse backgrounds.
Yeah.
I did it from a place of love. That's all it was. I just wanted to try to help and do better.
great. I love that. So Brandon, walk me through. You get done with your RDAP program. For the RDAP program is really the only program in the federal system where you can earn time off a year, or it depends on what the facility is. Sometimes it's 9 months, a lot of times it's a year, but it's a pretty hardcore program. 9 months of really adhering to, it's behavioral thinking, why you do what you do, and all the different things that are related to that rational thinking behaviors. But it's if taught properly, it should probably be taught in schools. I mean, it's something
it's an excellent program.
Makes sense. So you're getting close to the door, Branden, and everybody gets a little bit nervous with that because you kind of get into this world of prison, and then that you're getting to the door, and then what's changed, what's going on out here, what was going through your mind?
So believe it or not, and it's funny you said that, like everybody gets nervous. I was afraid to leave. I kind of felt a little guilty for leaving, which is not a feeling I expected.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure, people who are listening are probably like, yeah, you're crazy. It's a weird thing that happens. You adjust, you get used to it, you build relationships, you build a routine, and you get comfortable again. Right. And, the mind is an amazing ability to adapt. And so you adapt to your surroundings, and then you're going to have to re-enter the world. And that thought can get a little crazy. Because it's like, okay, well, in prison, it's easy. I don't have to think about what I'm going to do next. I'm told when I'm going to move. I'm told what to wear. I'm told when I'm going to eat, told what I'm going to eat, right? I don't think about anything except really myself.
Yeah.
And, what book am I going to read, and when am I going to work out, and, what am I going to write about today, right? Like, these are all positive things, but all of a sudden you're going to have to go back to being an accountable human, and that shift in your mindset is tricky. So I did actually get a little bit nervous, but I had a release plan already built. I had kind of my next few years of my life already laid out and what I wanted to accomplish. So I just went back to my plan and really was ready to get focused. But it was definitely a weird feeling. It was a really weird feeling, but also I felt grateful, and I didn't want to complain because, I did 10 and a half, 11 months on 37-month sentence. So I was the beneficiary of a lot of good luck along the way. And a lot of people would have killed to be in my place. Right. So I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it's just a weird emotion that happens when you're at the end of your sentence.
It is. There's a line in Shawshank Redemption where Red's telling Andy, he said, you look at these walls, and when you first get here, you see that they're to keep you in. And he said, after you look at them for a while, you've been here longer, he said, they're like the arms that hug you for comfort. And it's a weird phenomenon, but I think it's because you get into these crazy routines. And the reason I think you get in routines is you want to be in control of something when you really don't have control of anything. But there are hardcore, set routines. They're going to turn the lights off at 10 o'clock, and that's all there is. But when you got out, walk me through your life now, and what because you haven't been out that long, Branden. You've accomplished a lot. How did you re-enter the world, and what was life like, and friends and family and all that?
I mean, my life today is amazing. I'm just like blown away. I'm grateful and blessed, and it's just the fact that I am where I am right now, having this conversation with you. When I was, just a few years ago, a couple of years ago, I was behind double razor wire fence. It just blows my mind. But the initial transition was tough. The halfway house is not a fun place. I told my wife, like after the first night, she came to drop a couple things off for me, and I was broken down. I didn't sleep, and I had a moment of weakness, and I was like, I just want to go back. I just want to go back to prison, because prison is 1,000 times better than this.
Halfway house.
Yeah, the halfway house was terrible, and it made her cry, and I felt awful, right? Because I had that moment of weakness where it was just pure. I was just selfish, right? I didn't think that she was now seeing me for the first time in 11 months. I hadn't seen her. There's no visitation. And she's like, wow, you want to go back to that? And I can't see you. Right. So I didn't think how that would make her feel. And I had that moment. I rarely break like that, and I did. And it's like an embarrassing moment for me. But that probably tells you how bad the halfway houses are.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah, they're terrible. I would have taken isolation all over again. Anyway, so got through it though. A couple months there. There's really not much you can do when you're in a halfway house unless you have work release. We were not allowed to have visitors because of COVID-19 protocol. So anyway, got home, got moved to home confinement, and eventually found work for a friend who owns a biotechnology company. And he's like, I got a spot for you. Let's go. And so he brought me on, and I still actually work for that company. And I also I've started really leaning into coaching and business mentorship, as well as personal development mentorship. So I have a coaching brand on Instagram. My brand is White Collar Savage. And I share a lot of content around all kinds of stuff, business development, personal development.
No, it's really good. Everybody should check that out. It's White Collar Savage. I did a deep dive stalking on Branden. It's good stuff that you got on there.
Yeah, I try to make it somewhat entertaining and interesting, and it's really like fitness, mindset, business, themed, if you will. And it's really just me trying to build a brand around who I am and the person that I've become. I've become that kind of white collar savage, that strong individual that I don't think I ever was. Mm-hmm. And the contrast between the person I am today and the person I was, even though I was wealthier and, the world would perceive me as more successful, then I was, like I'd said, I was out of shape. I was, really like I was an alcoholic. I was, not disciplined. I would wake up late. Today, I'm sober. I'm in the best shape of my life. I am deeply invested in, serving others instead of just serving myself. I have a beautiful marriage. I just had a beautiful baby. Like we just moved to this gorgeous home. Like, I'm just like, how is this my life? I'm just so grateful, man. Like the blessings.
You got the good stuff going, Branden. That's for sure.
I'm on, right. We have these seasons of winning and losing in life. Right. And I'm entering a winning season, and I'm grateful for it, and I'm enjoying it. So it's just been wonderful.
Let me ask you this. If you have to look back and through everything that you've gone through, what do you think is your greatest takeaway out there to the listeners?
So you have so much strength in you that you will surprise yourself. But those dark moments are not always instructive. You could cave. People do cave to these things. I will share another example on my way out. I was quarantined for the third time, and the guy in the cell next to me slit his wrists. He broke.
Yeah.
Now, what's the difference between that guy and me? It's a choice.
Yeah.
Right? I chose to drop to the floor and do burpees and to, really focus on thinking the right thoughts. I chose to develop mentorship, or to seek mentorship from others. I chose to try to serve other people first before allowing myself to go too deep into myself, right? Yeah. That's a very selfish action. And so there are small things that you can do that they're small but significant. Mm-hmm. And, those are really the big takeaways for me was, I had to make the choice to choose strength over weakness. It is absolutely a choice. And that choice lies within, right in here.
In your mind. Absolutely.
In your mind. Yeah.
Man, that's good advice, Branden, and you live it. And if you follow Branden on his Instagram, you'll see it. But, and there's a couple of books we need to promote here. There's Looking Forward, which obviously this is what Branden done. You can get that on Amazon.
Yep.
You can get Nightmare Success, my book, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. If you guys like the show, man, share it. If you get anything out of it, the whole thing about this show is for people to get just nuggets of wisdom. This particular episode's got so many nuggets of wisdom in it from Branden. I know it's a hassle for everybody, but if you got time on Spotify or Apple, leave a review because it helps put the show on steroids. Go to brickcassidy.com. That's where I keep all my stuff. Remember, I spell Cassidy wrong. It's not like Sean and David. It's with a TY. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth when I was 11, was stay strong. I'll do the same. Branden, thanks so much for your story today. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate your time, man.